All right, thanks everyone for joining me. My research project was on virtual reality opportunities in the world of live sports. And since I just finished taking Communicating with Presence, I'm going to start with a personal story. So one of my favorite days growing up was Christmas Eve. And it wasn't just because it was Christmas Eve, but it was because my dad's work used to have this party in the mornings where all the kids would come in. They'd have all sorts of entertainment. They would have magicians. They would have balloon animals. And I vividly remember coming in one day when I was like 6 or 7 years old, and I saw one of these things. And in case you can't tell, this is a virtual reality headset from the mid-90s. So went over, put it on, and I played this game, and I thought it was amazing. One of the most awesome things I've ever done. And it looked a lot like that. So since then, virtual reality's come a long way, but it's taken a while, right? In the past couple years, we've sort of reached this turning point where virtual reality is about to go mainstream. And it's primarily because of both developments on the hardware front as well as the software front. So on the hardware front, where we are today is there's primarily 3 groups of virtual reality headsets. There's the high-end, there's the mobile-enabled, and then there's the standalone. The high-end headsets are what you think of when you hear brands like Oculus and HTC Rift and Sony PlayStation VR. And the way these work is they have super high-definition screens, great graphics, really advanced mobile tracking capabilities, but they must be tethered to either a high-end gaming PC, which could run you, close to $2,000, or gaming rig like the PlayStation 4, which is going to cost you like $500. So they're a little bit expensive and inaccessible to most consumers. Second category here, mobile-enabled, is basically these shells that you slip your phone into, and then the processing, the mobile display, all that runs through your phone. So while they work pretty well, it's pretty much limited to the powers of your mobile phone. And as a result, some of the mobile tracking capabilities aren't as strong as well. The advantage here is they're cheap, right? Everyone's got a phone already, and the headsets only cost you about $5 to $100. Third category here, standalone. There's not a lot of these out there in the market today, but a lot are being released over the next year or two. And these are headsets that have all the processing power, all the display within the headset, and some pretty impressive mobile tracking capabilities, not quite at the high-end level, but still pretty solid. And these will run about $200 to $600, but because they don't require another device to tether to, they're sort of viewed as being the potential to have sort of a mass market type virtual reality product out there. So on the software front, a lot of development has been made as well. Back in the 90s, we had gaming. Today, we've got pretty much everything. Everything from B2B applications to consumer entertainment applications. And that continues to grow. So last year, there was $84.2 billion in VC deals done in virtual reality. Most of that was going to the software side. So this list can, expected to grow in the future. And today, we're going to be talking about sports. So why sports? So the sports industry is facing a lot of challenges. Robert Kraft has a pretty good quote which sort of sums up the overall sentiment, and that is that millennials don't watch TV, they don't have TVs, or subscribe to cable. So we have to bring that audience in. The problem is that the sports industry relies tremendously on the ad dollars brought in through these traditional deals they have with major networks and then the cable providers. So if millennials are no longer watching there, they're losing those ad dollars, and they expect those trends to just continue in the future. What's actually interesting is when you look at the numbers, it's a little bit counterintuitive. Last year, NFL broadcast ratings amongst millennials dropped by 9%, but the actual percent of millennials watching the NFL increased by 2%. So that means that more millennials are actually watching live sports than ever before, but they're watching fewer games and for less time. And this exact same trend is consistent across all the major sports leagues. Second trend that's scaring the sports industry is the changing viewing habits. So this graph is a little busy, but on the left half, we have the percent of millennials in blue and Gen X in orange that use ESPN, NBC, CBS, or Fox to watch highlights and then to check scores and news. And then on the right half, we have the percent of those generations that use social media to watch highlights or social media to check scores and news. And what we can see is with millennials, a greater percentage are actually using social media these days to engage in the sports content over these traditional networks. And Generation X is not quite there yet, but the adoption of social media to consume this sort of content is actually growing at a faster rate with Generation X than the millennials. So what this is telling us is that these younger generations no longer are engaging with sports content in the sort of traditional linear broadcast type fashion, but they want something more interactive, more engaging, and more personal. And that's where virtual reality comes in. Sports leagues are viewing virtual reality as this new channel and a new way to engage these younger sports fans. And as part of my research, I talked to 3 major sports leagues, WWE, NBA, and NFL. And while they're all looking at VR as a way to increase fan engagement and ultimately viewership, they're doing so in very different ways with very different strategies. So WWE is a super interesting company if you don't know much about them. They've always been really on the forefront of the new media types and new technology innovations in sports. They got on social media early. They were one of the first major leagues to offer an over-the-top streaming service direct to consumers. And likewise, they're investing pretty significantly in virtual reality. With every major one of their events, they're also releasing virtual reality content in parallel. So why are they doing this? Well, they have a very passionate fan base. They want to engage those fans. And then also, if you think about wrestling, right? You have a small rink, so it's relatively easy to capture that content. And because the WWE is also scripted, they know where that action is going to be. And they're able to capture that content in a very engaging way. NBA is probably the leader in virtual reality investment. And their strategy is really interesting. It's really to recreate that live game experience. If you think about the NBA fan base, they first of all have a very, very global fan base. They have tons of fans outside the US. And then you think about even their fan base in the US, and it really spans all sorts of socioeconomic classes. So what that means is the vast majority of NBA fans are never going to be able to go to an NBA game themselves and experience that front row seat experience. So the NBA is looking to recreate this with virtual reality. And because that field of play, that court, is relatively small, and the action's relatively predictable in terms of, it's going to go this way, then this way, then this way. There's 2 hoops, that's it. They can capture some awesome content, engaging. They can get cameras by the hoops and wherever. So the content they're producing is actually pretty amazing, and they're not even giving it out for free, which most other leagues are doing right now. They're charging customers directly, so it's sort of a testament to that. NFL's taken a very different approach. They are taking more of a wait-and-see approach. Internally, a lot of their executives in these positions do not view virtual reality as a real mainstream technology yet. They actually have the belief that it won't become mainstream until mobile phones get powerful enough to provide these virtual reality experiences on their own. They don't think headsets are really going to catch on. So they are producing some content, some NFL film type experiences, some experience in terms of producing highlight reels and whatnot, but definitely not as aggressive as some of the other leagues. And then you think about capturing that content. Again, football field is huge. The sidelines are also mobile. You have players moving, you have coaches moving, you have the carts with the cameras on it moving. So it's not very conducive to setting up these stationary 360-degree cameras and then putting together compelling content. Especially if it's a Hail Mary on the other side of the field, you can't really see that. So when I sort of synthesized this research along with some others, I came up with this 2x2 chart because of our MBAs. So on the vertical axis here, I have the sort of randomness of the action, whether it's predictable and scripted or if it's very unpredictable type of play that can be anywhere. And then on the horizontal axis here, I have the field of play, whether it's small or large. Pretty self-explanatory. I mean, WWE is scripted, small rink, NFL is large, pretty random play. And in addition, I plotted some other sports leagues and other sort of live entertainment options here. One to note here is boxing. Boxing's taken off in virtual reality. Really compelling content. It's been getting a lot of views. And again, you think about it, it's pretty predictable. It's within this small area. You know how they're going to fight, and it's a small rink. MLB is similar to NFL. They're investing a little bit, but not too aggressively. Other one I want to point out here is Live Nation. Live Nation's the largest producer of concerts in the US. They're investing heavily in VR, and even though it's not sports, there's a lot of similarities there. Concerts will have a set list. They'll have choreography. They'll know where they're going to be on stage, and it's relatively small compared to, say, a football field. So they've been investing heavily in VR, and music's been pretty compelling content when it comes to that. So this sort of a framework, takeaway, be able to assess the appropriateness of VR to these live entertainment options, and that's what I got for you today. Thank you. Questions?
I know it's not directly. Where would you put esports? How does that fit into this?
Yeah, I mean, esports is interesting. Let's go back. There we go. So I wouldn't say esports is interesting because when people watch it, they can watch the players, they can watch the actual video game. So I think you got to think about it like a little bit differently than like an in-person live entertainment option, because I mean, theoretically, it wouldn't be very difficult for the content producers to drop like a virtual camera into the middle of a VR video game and just have the viewer literally stand there, look around, potentially even move themselves around the field of play. So I think there's a lot more potential there. And it's just, yeah, I think there's so much more potential. You got to think about it differently than some of these more traditional in-person live entertainment options. Good question. Yes.
So what the NFL management said kind of resonated with me, that they believe that the VR technology isn't really mainstream yet. And the reason I say that is because if I think about my 100 closest friends, former colleagues, classmates who are young and kind of have strong affinity towards technology, I can only think one person has like a proper VR setup at home. So I was curious to hear, what's your perspective on the technological advancements or breakthroughs that'll make it more mainstream and that'll enable like the NBA fan base to experience VR, even though it's kind of quite expensive right now?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think in the short term, that's definitely a hurdle that's going to be tough to get past. I think they're right. I think if mobile-enabled headsets get to the point where they're really compelling and there's a lot of content out there and it sort of reaches that tipping point where people start adopting it, I think VR takes off. But the mobile phone has a lot of technology setbacks, just a lot of capability limitations compared to some of these other headsets. So I think the standalone category is super interesting. If content gets to the point where there's enough out there, I think this is something that people will be willing to invest in. This is the price point of about HD TVs now, $200 to $600. So if there's enough content out there where they can both purchase one of these for like gaming needs as well as like content watching needs and television needs, I think the value prop gets pretty strong. So I do think the high-end headsets are going to sort of find a niche audience for people who already have like gaming PCs and whatnot, which can run you up to $2,000. So I think a lot of that does hinge on sort of the standalone headsets that are going to be coming out in the next year or two. Question. Shravya?
I can totally see for those consumers that are already interested in sports that this makes a total transition. So take someone like me that doesn't really watch most of these sports. Do you think this is an engagement for the brand new consumer to even be interested, or do you think that's a market that's a problem in itself, not necessarily through VR technology?
Yeah, I think of it more as a new channel for existing sports fans to engage in, because I think like fundamentally it's the same thing you're watching, just in new ways. But that drawing in new sports fans isn't the problem these leagues are having right now. It's overall ratings. They have a lot of millennials watching sports, just the amount of time they're watching sports and how many games they're watching. So it's an engagement problem. So if they're able to produce more compelling content, which in turn drives more engagement for this already large fan base, I think it's solving a lot of the problems they're seeing in traditional like broadcast. Good question. Yes. Either you guys.
Did you, this might be outside of scope, but did you think about how these will sort of change like the way we watch sports culturally? Like whenever I watch sports, it's with a group and we're all talking. I can't imagine like trying to watch sports with my friends and just all of us have our weird headsets.
Yeah.
Experience completely, right?
Totally. Yeah. That's a fantastic question. And everyone investing in sports VR is thinking about this, because sports inherently is a very social experience. Watching it, you want to talk crap to your friends and cheer with your fellow fans. So one way some sports leagues are thinking about it and what they're experimenting with are sort of these virtual lounges where you put on a virtual reality headset and then you're sitting on a couch with your friend who maybe lives on the other side of the country, and you have like a massive big screen in front of you in this virtual environment, and you both have your avatars, and the virtual reality headset is picking up your facial movements, and the voice is there. So it's almost like being at a bar at the same time and watching a game. So that's one way they're thinking about it, which doesn't provide the same immersion as like a 360-degree video where you're in the action, but definitely retains that social component and even enhances it when you think about distances between friends. When it comes to actually like sitting in a front row seat or a really compelling part of the arena or the stadium and watching this action with 360-degree view, that's a little more challenging. There are some ways companies are experimenting again with avatars floating there, but like it's definitely more challenging. Yeah, a good question. Gibbs? Same question. Okay, cool.
It is interesting that the commercial that the NBA shows, it's 3 people sitting together using the VR.
Yeah.
Using the VR application. So it is interesting that they recognize that and they're trying to promote it as something that you do as a shared unit.
Right. And if you think about the promise of virtual reality is it totally immerses yourself in an environment you're not in. So if you're in that environment by yourself, but then you're talking to someone out of that environment, it sort of dissociates it and it takes away a lot of the attractiveness of virtual reality and the value there. So great point. Yeah, and your brain just explodes. Yes.
So it's taken with the way the different sports are controlling the distribution channels.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that's perhaps harming the growth because they've got all these verticals that proprietary technologies potentially they're trying to have a subscription by sport, and do you see a role then for some other entity to come along?
Yeah. So it's a great platform question. Just to follow up on that question, when you say harming the growth, can you specify like what do you mean by that, harming the growth? You mentioned distributing content in a lot of different ways is harming growth. So
no, it's the fact that they're trying to control the content.
Yeah.
So for example, you would imagine NBA having its distribution and proprietary, and then the same thing with NFL, the same thing with
right.
baseball. And does that even make sense? I mean, the hardware will be common.
Mm-hmm. So what's interesting is, that's a great question, it's a great point. There's this company that I didn't include in this presentation, but that took a look at called NextVR. And NextVR is a platform which is available across different virtual reality OSs. And currently the NFL distributes their content through it. The NBA does, WWE, Live Nation, soccer, and a few others that I'm probably missing right now. So they are 100. It's happening, but not everyone's on board. MLB is trying to do it direct. NHL is trying to do it direct. So it is happening, and I do agree. I think that's the way it needs to go in order to get that sort of mass value proposition and hit the critical mass. But it's definitely something these guys are considering, and obviously builds a little bit of tension with the broadcast partners, you can imagine. But right now it's still in the early stages where that's not a huge issue. Yeah.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.